Thematic Inquiry-Based Biology course. This presentation is a description of a course that I developed and a curriculum that I developed, and this course and curriculum grew out of frustration and conflict between two competing needs in my teaching. One was to meet content standards and required content standards, which is a very comes from a very essentialist philosophy that there's this base of knowledge that we need to deliver and pass on, and contradict that with a constructivist philosophy, knowing that I want to provide an environment for students to conduct inquiry, to ask their own questions, and construct meaning, and do that through projects and project-based learning. And there was a real conflict there. And so I was searching for a way to make biology more relevant and interesting, and more than just a memorization of facts. And the other thing that this did for me, and this came out of, was that biology is such a huge topic. We've added essentially a year's worth of genetics and evolution and ecology to the biology curriculum without increasing the time. And so how do you prioritize? And what do you teach to a 15-year-old? Or what should a 15-year-old know to live in the world and not just meet the content standards? And so a little bit about the foundational thinking that led me to this. And we'll start with just the difference between an inquiry approach and a coverage approach. And the coverage approach is a more traditional approach. It's more fact-based. It's relying more on a textbook. It's relying more on teacher talk and direct instruction. And the inquiry approach is one that allows for use of multiple resources and multiple types of learning, and more performance and self-assessments as opposed to traditional testing. And I found that the standards, adhering to the standards and being so concerned about the content standards, always drove me to more of a coverage approach, which I wasn't comfortable with. And so again, how do I deal with that conflict? And the more we learn about how the brain works, the more we understand the importance of inquiry, yet standards and standardized testing seem to reinforce a coverage approach. So how do I balance those two? And let's talk about a constructivist classroom versus a traditional classroom. I was wanting a more constructivist classroom, one where students were pursuing questions of interest, one where the teacher is seeking the student's point of view and creating an environment for the students to construct their own meaning for a topic. Now that does not mean relativism. You know, that the parts of the cell are still the parts of the cell. But what it means is, instead of memorizing my understanding of a concept, I need to create a situation for them to build their own understanding of that concept that is right factually, but has meaning for them in their lives. It connects to how they are going to live in the world. And what this results in, I have found, is that in the traditional classroom and the traditional testing, oftentimes what I'm encouraging is students to just rent the information. They get it long enough to give it back to me on a test. But in a constructivist setting and an inquiry setting, I'm finding that students own the information. If they construct meaning, they then own it. And once they own it, they tend to not lose it, and so they get to keep that information. And that's what I'm going for. And so in this, and out of this, I developed a thematic unit design. And I developed a biology course that was thematic units, and not your typical unit on cells, a unit on plants, a unit on animals, but was thematic in nature. And so let's look at the steps about this. And the one thing that I always encourage young teachers is, you are the expert on the curriculum. You drive the curriculum, not the textbook, not the standards. The standards are not curriculum. And so looking at this, let's look at the steps here that I use to develop a course and a thematic unit. So first I have to identify the goals of the course. or the unit. So I'm looking at the description, I'm looking at the standards, I'm looking at a curriculum map for keywords, and then I research that topic. I need to become the expert. I need to identify the major themes. I can use the text for this, I can use trade books or websites, other resources, but I have to look at what are the major themes here. How am I going to break this into smaller ideas? And then step 3 is I need to develop questions. And these are not rhetorical questions. And I prefer to use questions as opposed to objectives. And we'll get to why in a minute. But they should be of interest to the students and designed so the students can and they will answer them. They are not rhetorical. So I'm going to start with a thematic or a big idea question. And actually, if you can, and for the biology course I did this, I started with a big idea question for the entire year and for the entire course. And I started the day 1 of the course by them taking a shot at answering that question first. And by the end of the year, I asked them that same question at the end of the year, and they wrote pages about that answer and that question. And I think they felt pretty proud of how much they could really elaborate on a topic. But I start with that unit level question, and then from there I break that down into essential questions or a topic question, and these are similar in size to maybe the size of a chapter in a textbook. And the summative assessments I use answer these questions, and often they answer those exact questions. And then the guiding questions, and these might be as small as a single topic or a single chapter objective, analogous to a chapter objective in a textbook. And those provide the students with the details about the content, about what we're going to learn, and often are answered within one lesson. And then I'm looking at, I got to do more research. I got to look specifically for inquiry activities, and the key here I'm looking for is not what am I going to do to show this to the students, but what are they going to do to learn it? And I like a quote from a Californian Indian, be careful of teaching somebody something because you rob them the chance of learning it, or something like that. And the more the students are doing with the information, so this is the question I always ask myself before I deliver a lesson is, not what am I going to do with this, but what are the students going to do with this? Because if they're not doing anything with it, if they're passively listening to me talk, they're not going to learn it. They might become interested in a topic, and then if they do something more with it, then they'll learn it. But if I'm just relying on me to tell it to them, at best they're going to rent the information. They're not going to own it. Then step 5, I need to revisit the questions and really evaluate, are they interesting? Do they relate to the students' lives? And this is always a challenge. Sometimes I get good ones, sometimes I don't. And I'm always looking to improve these. And then next, I need to create a final draft of the questions. And then look at the assessments for that unit. I want to work backwards here. This is backwards design. So I'm starting with my questions. And then from that, I'm looking at how are they going to show me they know this? Is it going to be an essay? Is it going to be a project? Is it going to be an objective test? What's it going to be? And then from there, I organize the resources, and I get that organized both for me and for the student. It's really crucial here that the student knows what's the question I'm going to answer, what are the resources I'm going to have to answer that question, and how am I going to answer that question. And I found this very helpful for organizing my resources and identifying those activities that I was doing because they were my favorite activity, but they didn't really fit the question. And I was doing them because I thought, oh, they just have a great time doing this. This is a fun activity. And so what that made me do was reflect on, well, if this activity is so important, then maybe I need to adjust my question. Or if my question is really valid, then this activity just does not fit anymore, and I need to find something else to do. Now let's move on to the course content and the organization. And the way that I do it is I start with the thematic questions that outline the big ideas. And so let's take a look at the example. And this course I actually start with a big idea question on the first day that is for the entire course. What is your role in the biosphere? And everything is building to that question, and I have them answer that question at the end of the year. That's their final exam. I give them a little more guidance than just that one question on it, but essentially what I'm asking them, so then, now that you have learned all this biology, how are you going to live in the world? How are you going to live in the world knowing you have a role in the biosphere? And I've been just amazed at how much they have to say about this, and how much good stuff they have to say that really relates to all the content we've learned. So giving them that opportunity to not regurgitate information but really apply it has been really remarkable. And so you can see here I have 6 units, and I partly have 6 units because it fit the trimesters in the school I was teaching when I developed this. I could do 2 units a trimester. But I like these 6 units. They start with matter and energy, and then go to ecosystems and populations, and homeostasis, or the balanced body, genetics and evolution. And if you look at the questions, they all have you in them. I am trying desperately to find a way for a 15-year-old to think about, how does this affect how they live in the biosphere? What is their connection to this? And so that it has meaning for them. There's a reason for them to learn it. Those big idea questions, then, I break that down into essential questions and guiding questions. And then I provide the students with an outline. And so here's an example of an outline. And so I have my thematic question for the unit, and then that's broken down into two smaller topics. And then each of those is broken down into guiding questions. And this is a document I give the students on the first day of the unit. And I tell them they can see what resources we're using. They can see the vocabulary for this unit. They can see the smaller guiding questions we're answering. And then you notice that there's a space for them to record a table of contents. And what I want them to do here is everything we do in the class, I want them to keep track of that assignment, keep track of the score, and then keep track of, did they make corrections on it? What question does it align to? So that this document becomes a study guide for them. They know, well, these are the questions I'm going to answer, and then they can match up. Here are the assignments that go with those questions. One of my pet peeves has always been the student who comes to me at the end of the unit and says, okay, now give me a study guide. And I think, well, we did all this stuff. And then, or they come in with an entire list of new notes about the topic that they've taken to get ready for the test, and they haven't looked at any of the assignments we've done. So for that student, those assignments were busy work because they didn't make the connection that those assignments were how they were learning the information and where the information was to be found. And I want them to be realizing that the work they've done contains the information for the unit, and that those assignments had value and they connected to the things that we were learning. And along the way, then, by having them recording those assignments, this is creating their study guide, and it's leading to good reflection and metacognition, which is where we want to get our students to. We want them thinking about, what did I learn, how did I learn it, and what does it mean? And that's metacognition. That's the highest on Bloom's, and that's where we want our students to be, not just regurgitating information for us. So let's talk about assessment and grading. And I use this language with my students as well, the difference between formative assessment and a summative assessment. And I really reinforce to them that everything we do along the way is formative. We are using that to give them feedback for what they know and how well they know it, to get them ready for the summative assessment at the end of the unit. And I'm also illustrating to them that this formative assessment is how I collect data. So I need to know what they know and don't know so that I can adjust my teaching along the way. And so it's very important for the formative assessment to be done honestly, without cheating, so that I can see what they know and don't know. If they all just copy the correct answers from the one person and student who knows it really well, then when I get that assignment turned in, I'm going to think they all know it and we're going to move on. And then when we get to the test, they're all going to fail it. And so really reinforcing and kind of letting them see that the process here involves me assisting them and helping them, and that I'm not a hurdle to get over, but I'm their collaborator in them getting ready for the summative assessment. And so the formative assessments I've broken into two categories. Ones I call introductory formative assessments. And these are assignments I use whenever they are getting introduced to a topic for the first time. I want them to have practices that allow them to discover and construct new knowledge in meaningful ways, and I grade those for effort and completion only because I want to encourage risk-taking. If this is truly something that is new for the first time, they shouldn't know it. And so let me put this scenario to you. We have a reading assignment at the beginning of Chapter 1, first week of school. And I have 10 questions for them to answer. And if they turn that in and I grade it just for those 10 correct answers, and they don't know them very well because, well, they don't know this stuff very well, and they struggle with it, and they get a 5 out of 10, now in the electronic gradebook, they're failing already, and they're going to panic, and they've lost those 5 points, and they're never going to get them back. And so when I get to the next assignment like that, what are they going to do? They're going to make sure they have those 10 points. And that might mean copying and cheating. And therefore, that formative assessment now has no value. It is complete busy work. It doesn't tell me what they know and don't know. And it did nothing for them to learn anything except who to copy from. And so those introductory formative assessments, I am looking that they have completed them. They have completed them thoughtfully, and I give them, and we talk about what this means to be completed thoughtfully and correctly. But essentially what I'm looking for is I want them to do their best to show what they know about a topic the first time and to explore it the first time and take the risk and put down what they know, and if it requires doing research and reading, then I do expect most of them will be able to find the right answers. But it's okay if they don't. What I'm looking for is that they've made the effort, and if they don't know the answer, they can't find the answer, then I'm looking for them to ask more questions. And instead of answering that question, maybe they're just writing in, where they know the information is, but they don't understand it, or what questions they need to ask in class to understand that topic. And so it's using that assignment not just as a point-getting assignment, but as a way for dialogue and interaction between myself and them as the learner. The other type of formative assessment is what I call a concept check formative assessment. And this is doing just that. I'm checking the concept, and I'm checking for understanding. And so these are things that are bigger, labs, maybe a traditional assignment that isn't their first look at a new topic, or a quiz would fit into this category. And these I am grading for accuracy. And I'm grading these for accuracy because I want them to get, we've already been introduced, now I'm expecting them to have some understanding of this topic. It may not be at the level I'm going to expect at the end of the unit, but it's a checkpoint along the way, and I want them to get that feedback along the way as to how well they really know this, so they can build on that. Then lastly, the summative assessments. And the summative assessments that I use are an exam, and I use open-ended essay exams always. They're connected directly to the thematic question, and often they are the thematic question. And my philosophy here is I want to give the student every opportunity to apply the terminology, to use the examples from the class, to show me their depth of understanding. I don't like multiple choice because I find that it tends to assess what they don't know, not what they do know. And so I might give them an essay question, but to get an A on that essay question, they have to use all the terms from the unit, and they have to use them correctly and applied correctly, and use examples from the unit or from the lab and apply those correctly. If they're giving me an answer that is a generalized understanding, then that's a C. So it really has upped the game and increased the depth of understanding that I'm expecting out of them. The other form of summative assessment is an extended inquiry, and this comes after the exam. The exam, I tell them, is completing my agenda for that unit. The extended inquiry now is their chance to dig into their agenda. So I give them about a week, and they dig deeper into one aspect of that theme. And for this, the beginning of the year, I'm asking them, the questions. Often I'm giving them project choices, project ideas, and this is project-based learning, and so I want them ultimately to be producing a product that is authentic and or a performance assessment of some kind. And at the beginning of the year, even if they design their own project and they have their own question, they tend to give me the Wikipedia reports, which, you know, is just basic information about something. By the end of the year, and that's okay at the beginning of the year, but by the end of the year, when we are in our last unit, I don't give them any project ideas. Their only project idea is design your own, or the only project choice they have is design your own. They have to create their own question, and they have to decide why they want to know it, and then what they're going to do with it. And my ultimate goal with them is for them to dig into an idea and create a product or an idea that is a new idea and that is applying the concepts from that unit, not just reporting information to me. And with 15-year-olds, some just have a hard time getting there, and the best they can do is reporting information. But for most of them, you know, I'm really getting them to think about, why do you want to know this? What does it mean to you? And what are you going to do with this information beyond just report it to me? And so for both these things, I really encourage a grading system that is holistic. Instead of breaking it down into individual points, they end up grubbing for those points. I want to encourage risk-taking with an emphasis on that summative demonstration of understanding. So I'm looking at, as a whole, their essay or their project, how does it answer that question? How well did they use the terms and the examples to answer those questions? For those essay exams, I have a very detailed rubric that has a checklist on it of terms I'm looking for, examples I'm looking for, things like that. So I can grade them fairly quickly. But in the end, I'm boiling that down to a single grade. And what has happened with that, when I have a student not get an A, and they come to me, the conversation I have is not what used to happen, which was, how do I get those 5 points back? Or why did I lose those 2 points? Or what happened with this question? The conversation I have is, what didn't I understand? How do I need to understand this better? And so by having that holistic grade, they are really thinking about the big ideas and applying the little details to the big ideas. All right, lastly, let's talk about reflection and feedback. And reflection is so important for learning. Reflection is the key to learning, I really believe. You know, in real estate, the adage is location, location, location. I feel that in education, it's reflection, reflection, reflection. That's where the learning happens. That's where the metacognition happens, and that's where we want to get our students to. And so your role is huge, of course, in this. Your feedback needs to trigger further processing. And what you want students to do is to be making sense, or do what I call sense making. And so when I grade something, I'm not just marking it right or wrong, but instead I'm posing further questions. And I require them to continue to work with the assignment after it's graded even. So even if they get an A on it, I might write 3 or 4 questions to force them to dig deeper into that topic. And in so doing, then I can differentiate that student who has already got it. I can get them to dig deeper. For the student who got a D on it, I might have 10 questions for them to answer that break that topic into smaller pieces for them and help them dig into it and hopefully develop their understanding on it. And then twice a term, I collect those assignments again, and I don't collect them every time. I'm not having them turn it in, and I'm not regrading it and replacing their original grade. I want to, there comes a point where if I tell you that we're going to take a quiz on this on November 15th and we need to know it on that day, then I'm going to assess it, what you know on that day. And if you don't know it very well, then that doesn't mean we forget about it. That means you have more work to do. So I'm going to give that quiz back to you with some more questions to answer and expect you to answer those to get ready for the summative assessment or the things that come after that. And then a couple times a term with 9th and 10th graders, I collect their binder and I see, are they making those corrections? And if they are, then that improves their grade. And if they're not, that lowers their grade. So there is the extrinsic reward there that some of them need. Most of them quickly figure out, though, that if they do those things, whether they show them to me or not, that's gets them ready for the exam. And then they can get an A on the summative exam. And the way I grade really uses the summative exams as the majority of the grade, because what I want to really stress is it's okay to struggle with something at the beginning of the term or throughout the term. What we really care about is, did you learn from those mistakes? And in the end, did you have it at an expert level? So they could get low grades in the beginning, but if by the end they show me expert level understanding of a concept, they can still get an A. And so they're not getting penalized for those early struggles. Again, I want to encourage that risk taking. And I want to encourage that it's okay to struggle with something at the beginning. And so I need to provide them mechanisms for reflection, if reflection is so important. So with younger students, about once a week, I'd like to do a reflection writing assignment. This serves as a great summative or formative assessment. It really does give me a look into what are they thinking and what are they understanding, and I can make this open-ended. It's not graded for points or for a letter grade, and it can be very useful. And I find some really great stuff here. You know, even just asking them, pick one thing from this week that you found most fascinating and tell me why. And from that I can really see their understanding, and it's low risk for them. And they're thinking about, what did I learn and how did I learn it? Sometimes I can get more pointed, you know, pick one thing about the group activity you did today in lab and tell me what worked well with working with your peers. You know, I could focus on skills like that as well. But then I also want to do periodic, real substantive reflection. And so I do this twice a term. I do this essentially I do it at the end of each unit. At the end of each unit, I want them to reflect on everything from that unit and how well have they done. And so I use a document that looks like this, that maybe at midterm, I'm having them evaluate themselves on their classroom performance. So how well did they use their class time? How well were they organized? The quality of the formative assessments. And so what I'm also using this as a lesson, the difference between qualitative and quantitative data, and how to use qualitative data in a more quantitative way. And so, for example, the quality of formative assessments, they're looking at what kind of scores did they get on those IFAs, the introductory formative assessments. And how well did they participate in the class, with their group? How well are they organized? And the sense making, which I think is the most important one, that's where, what work did they do with the assignments after they were done? Did they continue to make corrections on them? Did they take additional notes? Did they highlight things like that? And then the use of tools. So did they get extra help when they needed it? Did they use the online resources, things like that? And those are all the qualitative pieces. And then you notice the last thing in here is understanding course content. This is the most important part. The most important part are the grades that you earned on the summative assessments. And so those appear, if you have an electronic gradebook, those are going to appear there. And so what I want them to do is to use that as a baseline. So they look at what are the grades on the summative assessments and the labs and quizzes and things like that. And based on that alone, what is their grade? And that becomes their baseline. And then, looking at all the qualitative pieces, then they can adjust their grade up to one letter grade, up or down, based on those qualitative pieces. And then they turn this in, and then I do the same thing as well. And then that becomes the grade that is their term grade. And I'm pretty specific about this. So we'll look at if they have all B's on all their summative assessments, but they haven't done the sense making and they haven't done the organization, their grade's going to drop. And vice versa, if they've got solid B's and everything, but they've done all the other things that I've asked them to do, then their grade's going to go up a little bit. And so they propose a grade, and then I get to assign a grade because I'm the one in charge, and ultimately it is not a democracy. I like to, maybe it's a benevolent dictatorship. But I have found that they really do appreciate having an input in this, and the metacognitive skills that they develop and the learning skills that they develop far exceed any of the biology that I'm teaching this. And so I think there's real value in this. And so it's a real mix of meeting my agenda with the content standards, but then providing them a chance to do inquiry on their own, in the individual labs that I do that are all very inquiry-based, or the big projects I do at the end of each unit that are very inquiry-based as well.